A few years back, I realized I needed a drastic shift in my life. Everything seemed to be spiraling out of control. My finances, my mental well-being, my entire existence. There were weeks where I couldn't sleep, the constant city traffic echoing through the streets below. Every time I stepped outside, the situation appeared grimmer. More homeless individuals, more drug paraphernalia littering the sidewalks, more muggings, assaults, overdoses, and deaths. The city had deteriorated into a wasteland, and I knew it was time to leave. I had no girlfriend, no wife, no children. My parents had passed away a few years before, and my relationship with my siblings had become distant. There was nothing holding me to this place where I felt like I was slowly withering away. So, I sold nearly everything I owned, got in my car, and headed to Alaska, hoping to start anew. I bought a small cabin and a plot of land amidst its towering mountains and dense, mysterious forests. In winter, the northern lights would pierce the night like the eyes of a divine being, casting trails of light that danced across the sky in cosmic waves. The move did bring me some peace of mind, but ultimately, the root of all my problems followed me across those thousands of miles into the vast wilderness. It took me a long time to understand that the source of my misery was within me. As the saying goes, wherever I go, there I am. I lived in that cabin for 3 months without any major issues, aside from the constant threat of bears, moose, and wolves. I had a rifle and a shotgun for hunting, a small garden in the backyard, and a solar panel to generate electricity. This is the life, I thought, as I relaxed in a hammock strung across a corner of the cabin, gazing at the breathtaking beauty outside the window. Snow-capped mountains towered like giants above dense clusters of evergreens. A fresh layer of snow made the world outside glisten and sparkle. Not a house or road was in sight. No work, no stress, no pollution, no honking cars. I closed my eyes, taking in the crisp, clean air. I ended up dozing off for a couple of hours, waking just as the sun began to set. Bright orange streaks mingled with the blood-red smears of the fading light as it disappeared behind the mountains. Still groggy, I stumbled over to make a cup of instant coffee. As I sipped it, I wandered around the room, looking for something to occupy my time. There were still several random items left behind by the previous owner that I hadn't disposed of yet. Among them was a bookshelf filled with classic works by Philip K. Dick, Isaac Asimov, and Robert Heinlein. Bored, I began rifling through the collection, searching for something to pass the time. As I shuffled past A Maze of Death and Ubik, something unusual caught my eye. It was a black, leather-bound book with no title or author's name, its cover worn with age. Curious, I pulled it from the shelf and opened it. Inside, I found cursive writing scrawled across the pages in a neat copperplate script. It was a diary left behind by the previous owner. The first entry was dated January 9th, 2015. This is what it said. I don't know if I'm losing my mind. I went into town to see my therapist yesterday, and she suggested I try writing everything down. She talks to me like it's all in my head, but I know it's not. When I first moved into the cabin, it felt like paradise. I never imagined in a million years that something would be creeping around at night. I never thought it would be hiding under my bed, peeking through windows, or trailing me like a shadow. Right now, I'm snowed in with a cup of coffee in one hand and my pistol in the other. I can't sleep anymore. I keep hearing something shuffling under the bed. Sometimes, I think I can even hear ragged breathing, like a corpse with dirt-filled lungs has come back to life. I've caught glimpses of that thing in the darkness. Whatever it is, its skin is loose, almost hanging off the bone. It looks like a naked, emaciated man. Its eyes are decayed and dark, its back hunched, its spine twisted and protruding like tumors. It moves in a slow, jerky manner, but I can never seem to catch it. Its body seems broken and misaligned. Its legs sometimes bend the wrong way. By the time I turn on the lights or try to capture it on video, it's always gone. But its stench lingers. It hangs in the cabin like the sweet smell of a spreading infection. I don't know what it wants from me. I want to leave, but with the storm raging outside, I'm trapped here, unable to make it back to town. The snow has piled up around the cabin in mounds 5 feet high. I feel like a prisoner, caged with a rabid beast, never knowing when it will strike. My wife insists she hasn't seen or heard anything unusual, yet she keeps disappearing on me. Last night she vanished during a snowstorm. Where did she go? I asked her this morning, but she claimed she was here the entire time and remembered nothing. There's no way she made it into town. The trails were snowed in, and there simply wasn't enough time. Something is definitely happening here, but I can't figure out what it is. I'm genuinely terrified for our lives. I slammed the diary shut, unwilling to read another word. I didn't want to succumb to some kind of contagious cabin fever. If the last owner had lost his mind in these mountains and started seeing things, hallucinations of naked corpses crawling around, I definitely didn't want to know more. Shoving the diary back onto the bookshelf, I grabbed A Maze of Death instead, hoping it would distract me. I tried to push the image of the naked, twisting figure with decayed eyes out of my mind as I flew through the novella. But all night long, that grotesque image lingered in my thoughts, refusing to fade. I finally fell asleep just before dawn, but as I was drifting off, I thought I saw a shadowy figure at the window. A gaunt man with hungry, rotting eyes. He seemed to press his unnaturally long fingers against the glass, leaning closer. I jolted upright, blinking and staring out at the snow-covered landscape. There was nothing there. A fellow hunter would sometimes follow the deer trails near my cabin. About a quarter mile away, a frozen lake lay still, its surface hidden beneath thick drifts of snow. I decided to go for a hike at dawn, bundling up against the frigid air. I strapped on my snowshoes and grabbed my shotgun, as I always did when heading out. Up here, you never knew when a polar bear might be lurking behind the next tree. When I opened the door, I saw footprints pressed into the snow all around my house. My first thought was of the shadowy figure, the nightmare from the diary. But the footprints didn't lead to my window. Instead, they followed a trail about 20 feet away, veering off toward the frozen lake at the bottom of the hill. I glanced in that direction and spotted a black figure trudging slowly forward. "Steve!" I called out, recognizing my only neighbor within a 4-mile radius. He had his own cabin about a mile away. Startled by the sudden shout, he jumped, his black snow pants and heavy fur coat swishing as he spun around, raising his rifle in alarm. When he saw me, he relaxed, lowering the rifle and raising a gloved hand in greeting. "Hey, Josh! Didn't expect to see you up this early," he yelled over the quiet winter landscape. The world always seemed strangely silent after a snowfall, as if the snow absorbed every sound. "Yeah, I've been having trouble sleeping," I replied, slinging my shotgun over my shoulder. "What are you up to?" "Just a bit of hunting," he said with a sly wink. "Animals are always most active around dusk and dawn. That's when I usually have the best luck." He stepped closer, scrutinizing my face. "You look like hell. Those bags under your eyes could carry groceries." "Yeah, I know. Hey, this might sound strange, but did you know the previous owner of this cabin?" I asked. Steve's weathered face immediately darkened, his expression growing guarded and distant. "Sure, I knew him," he replied curtly, searching my face as if looking for something, though I had no idea what. His reaction left me feeling uneasy. "Is he still around?" I asked, sensing his discomfort. Steve's scowl deepened. "Listen, I don't know what you've heard, but he's dead. He died in that cabin," Steve said, pointing a finger at my home. With those words, a cold wave of dread washed over me, settling heavily in my stomach. How did he die? Was it a heart attack or something?" I asked hesitantly. Steve looked down, avoiding my gaze. "Did you know that Alaska has the highest rate of missing persons in the entire United States? By a wide margin. For our population size, more people go missing and are never found here than anywhere else. They even have a name for it. The Alaska Triangle," Steve said, his voice tense. "And we're right in the middle of it." I stared at him, unsure where he was going with this, but it felt like he was evading my question. "No, I didn't know that," I responded, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the cold air. Steve nodded, lifting his head again and letting out a deep sigh. "Look, what happened with the last owner and his wife? It's unsettling. If you really want to know, I'll tell you, but it's not going to bring you any peace of mind. and it sure won't help you sleep any better. I want to know, I insisted immediately. The wind suddenly picked up, whipping past us and sending flakes of ice and snow flying sideways in the sudden gusts. Let's head back to your cabin, Steve said, pulling off his heavy fur-lined hood and shaking out his long black hair behind him. I could use a bit of whiskey to warm up. We sat down with a bottle of Johnny Walker and 2 shot glasses. I wasn't much of a drinker, but Steve certainly was. He downed 3 shots in less than a minute. I sipped at mine, drinking half before setting it back down on the coffee table with a solid thunk. Steve grunted, hissing through his teeth as the burning liquor coursed down his throat. "Ah, that's the good stuff," he said, slapping his chest as the warmth spread through him. Steve looked up at me with a glint in his eyes. "So, you really want to know what happened to Will Lenning?" "Well, I'll tell you, but no one knows the full story. I used to see him now and then. He'd come down for a drink and some conversation. We all know each other around here, as you'd expect." I nodded, urging him to continue. "He seemed like a regular guy, just like you. A young man trying to escape the rat race, the grind of the so-called American dream. He was here for maybe a few months. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. We'd go skeet shooting now and then, have a beer or 2. Sometimes we'd get together with a couple of other hunters who lived closer to town for some poker. I never saw anything strange about Will. I could never have predicted what happened." Steve sighed deeply, looking out the window at the sharp peaks of the mountains, his expression tinged with nostalgia. "So what happened to him?" I prompted. He started talking about seeing someone peering in through his window at night. He mentioned hearing sounds from under his bed while he lay there in the dark. Sounds like sick, labored breathing and shuffling. Eventually, he began leaving all the lights on in his cabin, day and night. Steve leaned in closer, and I noticed a flicker of fear in his pale, wrinkled face. He started to lose his grip. He began digging holes all over the place, searching for something. Even in the middle of snowstorms, I'd sometimes see him outside, digging like a madman. It seemed like he never slept. It was classic cabin fever, if I've ever seen it. A few weeks later, I came over, worried because I hadn't heard from him in days. That wasn't like him. When I arrived, I found the door wide open. And there, in the very spot where you're sitting now, Will was slumped in a chair with a blast hole right through his skull, a shotgun at his feet. Next to him, I found a blood-stained diary, open to the middle page. The last entry was splattered with blood, but still readable. I remember bending down to read it. It was just a few sentences long. I glanced over at the bookshelf where the same diary now sat, remaining silent. It said something like, "I see now what's going on. The twisted man is leading me to the truth. Today, I will finally find it." "And that was his suicide note?" I asked, my heart pounding in my chest. Steve nodded. "Yeah. I went into town and got some rangers to come check it out. Eventually, they brought in the cops and CSI. They took everything as evidence, including the diary," he said. "Good riddance, if you ask me. Reading something like that isn't good for anyone. Sometimes delusions can spread like a virus. You know what I mean?" I did, but I kept quiet. I glanced back at the diary, its black leather cover gleaming ominously, like a coiled snake. And I wondered, if the police took the diary as evidence, how did it end up back here? "You mentioned he had a wife living with him too?" I asked. "Yeah. She went missing around the same time," Steve said, his tone darkening. "Pretty strange. The cops thought maybe she just left, but..." He shook his head grimly. "As far as I know, she was never seen again. It's like she vanished into thin air." After Steve left, I walked slowly over to the bookshelf and pulled down the diary. I flipped through the pages until I reached the middle. There, I found the last entry. Spatters of old, darkened blood dotted the page like raindrops. I read the suicide note, noting the date. January 27th, 2015. It said, "Will Lenning hadn't lasted long after he began seeing the twisted man. I wondered if my fate would follow the same path. The sun had started to set outside as I sat at the small circular kitchen table, the diary in hand, eating stewed venison and rice while I read through the entries. Near the end, Will Lenning wrote that the twisted man had been trying to lead him somewhere, that this figure was actually attempting to protect him from some great evil, rather than being the source of it. I scoffed, a flash of anger surging at the sheer stupidity of it all. His naivety had obviously led him to his death, but then, like a bolt of lightning, a realization struck me. What if I was making the same mistake? Maybe I should just grab my gun and valuables and leave. I could hop on the snowmobile and be in town within a couple of hours, but deep down, I knew I wouldn't. Something about the mystery of it all beckoned me to stay. Like a siren leading sailors to their doom, my curiosity called out, and I knew I wouldn't be leaving that night. I needed answers, and tragically, I would find them. I had fallen asleep with an empty beer bottle in my hand, slumped in front of the TV, which only got satellite reception. There were no cable or phone lines threading their way through the dense forest. My power came entirely from stored solar energy, which was usually sufficient even in the dead of winter. Normally, I barely watch TV, using electricity mostly for cooking or heating water. But tonight, I needed the noise, the mindless flashing of light, colors, and canned laughter. It seemed to drive away the creeping, suffocating presence like a candle in the dark. I woke up suddenly. The TV was hissing with static, the white noise spitting from the speakers like 1,000 angry snakes. I glanced at the clock. 3:33 a.m. I looked around the dark cabin, disoriented, trying to understand what had woken me so abruptly. The satellite had never gone out before, not even in the howling winds and freezing hail of an Alaskan winter. The TV flickered, as if the static were bubbling up from beneath the screen. Black lines traced their way horizontally across it. The hissing deepened into a guttural noise, and for a moment, I thought I heard faint words behind the white noise. I thought I heard slow, labored breathing, like the death rattle of a drowning man. A black line rose across the screen, and an image started to take shape. The cabin fell into an eerie silence, save for the shrieking wind outside. I leaned closer to the screen, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It looked like a live camera feed of a room. As I took in the details, a chill ran down my spine as I realized it was my cabin. I saw myself in the chair, leaning toward the screen. I raised my hand, and the miniature version of me on the screen did the same. Cold dread washed over me. "What the fuck is this?" I whispered, glancing back to where the camera should have been. But there was nothing there, just the coarse wooden ceiling in that corner. I turned back to the screen, and my breath caught in my throat. The TV now showed a pale, naked man crouching directly behind my chair. His movements were jerky as he rose, his broken spine twisting and shivering. A voice, rasping and filled with the sound of dirt and crawling maggots, oozed from the speakers. "He is a killer, the shadow of death," it gurgled. "Many have fallen. Many lie buried across this forest. You will be next. He is watching you." Long, broken fingers with blackened nails reached out, inches from my shoulders. I jumped out of the chair, stumbling backward in terror. My back slammed into the TV, knocking it to the floor with a shattering of glass and a burst of light. In those brief moments before darkness descended on me like a heavy blanket, I thought I saw a pale, sunken face with rotted, blackened eyes peeking out from behind the chair. I turned on every light in the cabin, searching for any sign of the twisted man, but there was nothing. Still, I knew I had to get out of there. The voice's warning echoed in my mind. If the creature wanted to attack me, why hadn't it done so while I was sleeping? None of it made sense. Who was really watching me? The twisted man? And if it was him, why warn me? I wondered if it was all psychological warfare, a sick game to torment me before delivering the final blow. My thoughts raced as I hurriedly threw on snow pants, layered with heavy sweaters and coats. I covered every inch of my body to protect against frostbite. I had made up my mind to flee. There was no snowstorm tonight, but the entire landscape was blanketed in snow, and the wind chill would be like an ice blade slicing against my skin. It was incredibly dangerous to travel in the middle of the night in temperatures that could plummet to -30 degrees. Steve had been right. Alaska had the highest missing persons rate in the country, with many victims never found, likely frozen solid in the deep snow miles from the nearest town. I grabbed my shotgun, jumped on the snowmobile, and headed toward Steve's cabin. I hoped I could wait there until sunrise and then figure out my next move. But fate had other plans. As I drove along the narrow, winding deer trail, I couldn't shake the unsettling feeling of being watched. The boughs of the evergreens seemed to reach out like greedy hands, clawing at my coat and legs as I passed. More than once, I caught a glimpse of a pale, naked figure standing in the snow. But each time I turned to look, it was gone. A sigh of relief escaped me when Steve's cabin finally came into view, the warm glow of lights twinkling through the small windows. I pulled up next to his door, glancing down at the snow. 2 pairs of footprints stood out, one much smaller than the other. It struck me as odd, but I brushed it off. The snowmobile sputtered to a stop with a gurgle. I knocked on the door several times hard. After a few moments, Steve appeared, groggy and half-dressed. He blinked slowly, looking me up and down before his wrinkled face settled into a frown. "Steve, I need a favor," I said quickly, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. "Something weird is happening at my cabin. Can I stay here until morning? Maybe then I can head into town or something. I can't stay there tonight. I just can't." He nodded, yawning as he motioned me inside. "You can sleep on the couch, I guess," Steve said, his tone indifferent. "But put that shotgun somewhere safe, boy." His cabin was larger than mine, with a partitioned bedroom, but it was still just a small kitchen-living room combo, a bedroom and a bathroom. He pointed to a worn couch in the corner and gave me a dismissive wave before stumbling back into his bedroom, slamming the door behind him. But I couldn't sleep. My mind was too restless, my nerves too frayed. I wandered around the room, eventually finding myself at Steve's bookshelf. His taste in books was strange. An entire collection of true crime novels by Anne Rule, along with numerous titles about serial killers like Ted Bundy, John Wayne Gacy, Richard Chase, and others. At the end of the shelf, a large black binder stood out, its worn, unlabeled cover reminding me of the leather-bound diary from my cabin. My heart dropped, but I couldn't resist the pull of curiosity. I slid the binder off the shelf and opened it. What I found inside filled me with a dread so profound it was almost paralyzing. The binder was crammed with news clippings, dating back nearly 20 years. The first one was about a woman who went missing while hiking in the Alaskan forest. A later clipping confirmed that her body was never found, and her family was still holding out hope that she might be alive somewhere. A reward was offered for any information leading to her whereabouts. Page after page followed the same grim pattern: missing woman, murdered prostitute, missing man, no leads. I kept flipping through, each article more horrifying than the last, until I reached clippings about Will Lenning's suicide and the disappearance of his wife. On the article about Will's death, Steve had scrawled, "Ha ha," in red marker. The click of a gun being cocked behind me froze my blood. Steve's voice cut through the air, soft, yet tinged with mocking amusement. "How do you like my work, friend?" he asked, his tone dripping with dark satisfaction. I gripped the binder of horrors tightly, staring at the man I thought I knew, my mouth hanging open in shock. "It's you? You killed Will Lenning and his wife? And all those other people?" My voice trembled as everything around me seemed to blur, like a nightmare I couldn't wake from. Steve's grin stretched across his face, but his blue eyes remained icy, devoid of any warmth. "Yes. Well, she was cheating on him with me anyway. Just another whore, you know. They always get what's coming to them in the end," he hissed, venom dripping from every word. "It's too bad, really. I just killed another slut tonight. I was planning on saving you for later. The urge isn't too bad yet. It comes in cycles, you see. It comes in waves." As he spoke, I noticed something behind him, a glimmer of pale, naked flesh, moving with jerky, unnatural motions. The twisted man had appeared, creeping up behind Steve. I stayed silent, my heart hammering in my chest, watching in a mix of horror and awe. "You need help, man. I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady. Steve let out a laugh that was more of a bark. Help? The only help they give people like me is a needle in the arm. You know that. That's why it's important to always cover your tracks. His voice trailed off as the twisted man's long, broken finger traced a line across Steve's neck. Steve let out a strangled cry and spun around, screaming in terror. I glanced over at my shotgun, still lying next to the couch. Without thinking, I lunged for it. Steve fired his pistol twice as he turned back toward me. The first shot flew over my head, sending wood splinters raining down, but the second tore into my leg, a cold, burning pain searing up my shin. I screamed in agony, but adrenaline fueled me as I grabbed the shotgun, spun around and fired. The slug tore through Steve's skull, his head exploding in a gruesome spray of bone, blood, and brain matter. His forehead caved in like a crushed melon, and his body crumpled to the floor, lifeless. The cabin fell silent, save for the wind howling outside, and the acrid scent of gunpowder hung in the air. I stared at Steve's body, the realization of what had just happened slowly sinking in. The twisted man stood there, hunched over, grinning up at me with that ghastly, sunken face. I could feel the warm blood gushing from my leg, each heartbeat sending fresh waves of pain through my body. My breath came in ragged gasps as I stared back at him, a question burning on my lips. You weren't after me at all, were you? I asked, my voice trembling. You were after Steve. But the twisted man remained silent, his hollow eyes offering no answer. After what felt like an eternity, he slowly slinked back into the shadows of the bedroom, disappearing into the darkness. As the night dragged on and the first light of dawn began to creep in, the twisted man's cryptic words echoed in my mind, suddenly becoming clear. He is a killer, the shadow of death. Many have fallen. Many lie buried across this forest. You will be next. He is watching you. He hadn't been trying to harm me at all. He had been trying to warn me. The twisted man had likely tried to warn Will Lenning and his wife, too, but they hadn't understood until it was too late. I wrapped my leg in gauze, gritting my teeth against the pain. The wound was deep and puckered, but I was relieved to find that I could still move my foot. The bullet had passed clean through the flesh. I poured alcohol over the injury, screaming as the searing pain lanced through me. After rummaging through Steve's bathroom, I found some prescription painkillers. I swallowed a handful with a gulp of beer, knowing the numbing high would be necessary to endure the agony of the ride into town. As the sun finally broke over the horizon, I limped outside, leaving the blood-stained floors of Steve's cabin behind me. The snowmobile waited, a lifeline to civilization. But before I left, I turned back to that wretched place, the scene of so much horror and death. In the open doorway, the twisted man stood, his back hunched and his rotted lips stretched into a grotesque grin. His hand lifted in the air, moving with those familiar jerky motions, and he waved. I raised my hand in return, offering a small wave as I started the engine and sped off toward town, leaving the nightmare behind.